Everyone. Great that we've got some people online joining us. I can see we have got Kate and Andrew together from somewhere where you're working on FDS. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and you got some time constraints maybe?
We're starting at 9:30 with the iwi, Otako and Pukatareki. So we're going to have to leave, and that's why Karen and Edward aren't here.
Yes, yeah, okay, that's good. And I could see we've got Councillor Malcolm there. And who else have we got? Anyone else?
We've got Nick Donnelly and Kirsten Strauss.
Yeah, Nick Donnelly and Kirsten Strauss online as and in the chamber we have got Alan Somerville and Lloyd McCall. We've got Anita, Warren and Joe, and we've got Gavin as well, and obviously Richard as well, Wiley and myself. So I'll just kick off with a karakia, and we are recording today. Tue ki runga, tue ki raro, tue ki waho, tue ki roto, tue ki te here tangata, ka rongo te pō, ka rongo te ao, umie, huie, taekie. So yeah, we're going to be doing this workshop, which is public and I believe, and recorded. And we're going to be looking at the fast track approvals bill and a submission. So I'm going to hand over to Anita.
Thank you, Morena. And just first, I think it's really important to acknowledge, generally we just use the submissions working group for these things, but this one is very big and covers a wide range of legislation. So the submissions working group, we're comfortable that it come to all of council, but that is why it's been put in at short notice. So I do appreciate you coming at short notice. We've got a range of staff online and in the room. We've all had several reads of the bill, but it's fair to say that there's a lot in there. So we'll do our very best to answer all your questions that we have today. And if there are any we can't, we'll come back to you on those. We're going to run through some slides just to sort of set the scene, talk about our experience with the existing fast track legislation as a regulator. And then we've got some prompts for some topics for discussion. There's a decision point in terms of whether you want to lodge your own submission or whether we leverage the sector submission, and we'll come to that a little bit later on. But if you're happy, we'll just kick in.
I'll just note as well, we've had a couple of other councillors join. We have Councillor Alexa Forbes and Brian Scott that I can see there. Just also with that time constraint for councillors Wilson and Known, yeah, we just need to factor in that they need to have some feedback prior to the 9:30. So yeah, can you keep that in mind?
Sure, and they're on the submissions working group, so they'll be able to have that that final look at the proposal. So we'll give you the timeframes at the end, but you don't feel constrained to these 2 hours. The aim is that we'll have the draft submission to the submissions working group by Monday. They're due to be lodged next Friday. So that's the timeframes that we're working to. So we've just talked about the purpose there. This is reasonably well socialised. So the RM reform that the government has signalled is in 3 phases. The first phase has been done, which is to repeal the Natural and Built Environment Act and the Spatial Planning Act. And then stage 2, which is where we are now, which is a fast track consenting regime, and to make some targeted changes later in 2024. You'll recall there was an email that went out a couple of weeks ago to provide some feedback by the 5th of April on some very targeted changes. So there are a couple of things that we put forward there. And then stage 3, which is a bit later on, is to replace the RMA with a new framework. We circulated the regional sector submission yesterday. The process that works through is that the CEs sign off on that. So that's sitting with Richard. Obviously that recognises that there are positive opportunities that the bill can enable. But the key, some of the key issues from the sector are just understanding the impacts. So with our experience with some fast track legislation, understanding how these sorts of bills can impact our resources, our opportunities, things like that. there is at the moment a clause in the bill that says if an activity is currently in a plan as prohibited, that doesn't mean you can't apply for it to be a fast track. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. The sector has talked about being really transparent about how you get into the system and the process, and being transparent around decision making in terms of referral, so that everyone's really clear. And then there's a preference for all projects to be referred rather than enabling some projects to go in by a list. So there's two ways to get into the fast track, and we'll speak to those two. But that's just some very high level points from the regional sector submission. So the bill itself.
Sorry, Anita, just on that point, when you say referred, are you saying who would refer? Can I just have some clarity around that?
Yeah, so we'll talk through, and at the moment, anybody can make a request to refer as the bill set out. So it wouldn't restrict who, but the sector's saying rather than having two pathways, so one as a listed schedule and one as a referral, the preference is for everything to have to be referred to go through that process.
Referred by whom?
Well, it could be anybody. At this stage, the referral process is open to anybody.
Yeah, but you don't want the referral. You do want the referral.
Yeah, what the sectors say. So at the moment, and sorry, this is a few slides down. At the moment,
Okay, sorry.
No, that's fine. There's two. You're very time constrained, so it's useful. There's two pathways. One is you can submit your proposal through the portal, which is open till the 3rd of May.
Yep.
There's no visibility at the moment of what or who is going to submit on the portal. And the other pathway that is open is by referral, which once the bill becomes an act, that pathway will become available. What the sector is saying is their preference would be for everything to need to be referred rather than things going through a portal, just so that there's really good transparency over what is coming in. So what's going to happen at the moment.
But the alternative is that the list is made public and open.
Yep, I'm just outlining what the sector is in terms of everything to go through that referral process. But the portal's open. There are people lodging projects in the portal now, and that stays open till the 3rd of May. So at the moment, there are very clearly and obviously two tracks. The sector's saying for transparency reasons they would prefer everything to be referred. So that's just in terms of the purpose, so fast track decision making process to facilitate infrastructure and developments that have significant regional or national benefits. That term, significant regional or national benefits, isn't defined anywhere that I have seen. And so that's one of the areas where some transparency or criteria would be useful. The purpose sits in section 3 of the bill. Section 10 basically says that this act supersedes all the other acts that it applies to. So rather than needing a consent under the Conservation Act or a mining permit or the RMA, you get approval under the Fast Track Approvals Act. So in essence, it's a one-stop shop. So, you know, for someone that needed to get consents from different agencies under different legislation, they can bundle them up and apply as they're relevant to the Fast Track Approvals Bill. This is the list of regulations that are currently subject to the bill. So if you needed multiple consents, and as an example, potentially if you were doing a subdivision that had a heritage place or a heritage site, you'd need an RMA consent and a consent under the Heritage New Zealand Pūhere Taonga Act. You would instead just go through the Fast Track Consenting Act and get one approval. What we have noted is the LGA bylaws are not included in here. So there are still some pieces of legislation that would require a separate consenting process. So the referral process, and so this is the process that we were just speaking about before in terms of Councillor Wilson's question. So it's set out, there's quite a few sections in the bill that set it out. So there's a panel that's appointed to assess each referral, and it can be a whole project or part of a project that goes through. any person may apply to the joint ministers for a project to be referred. And there's 3 ministers that are described as the joint ministers, which are the ministers of, now I'm going to forget, transport, infrastructure and regional growth, regional development. Yeah, are the 3 ministers. A Part A project, so one that is, sorry, I just completely forgot what Part A is. It's Part A. Sorry. Oh yeah, so it just needs to be lodged with the EPA for assessment. And then a Part B project is one that's considered to have significant regional or national benefits. So there's just 2 different ways that you can get through in that referral process. And then anything that's not listed can be referred. So anything that doesn't get on through the portal can still be referred to an expert panel by the ministers. The ministers are required to consider treaty settlements and other iwi obligations that they're bound by. Section 14 sets out the process, and then Section 15 sets out the consultation requirements. So before lodging an application, relevant iwi, hapu and treaty settlement entities must be consulted. Any groups that have customary marine title or applications, and relevant local authorities. It doesn't bind those parties to agree or support, it just requires them to be consulted and an outline of the consultation and where that's got to be lodged with the application. So in terms of projects that may be referred, Section 17 sets out that if you're considering something that has significant regional or national benefits, then there's a whole list of things that may be considered. So whether it's been identified as a priority project, and that sets out, it may be by government or a local government in a plan or a strategy. So there's a number of ways that it could be identified as a priority project. If it will deliver regionally or nationally significant infrastructure, will it address housing needs or contribute to a well-functioning urban environment? Well-functioning urban environment is the term that's in the NPS for urban development, so that's ties back to that NPS. Whether it will deliver significant economic benefits, supporting primary industry, including agriculture, support development of natural resources, including minerals and petroleum, support climate change mitigation, support adaptation, resilience and recovery from natural hazards, address significant environmental issues, and whether it's consistent with local regional planning documents, including spatial strategies. So there are a list of may, not must, which is important to note there. And that's, I guess the other key point is it's a really broad range of considerations there in terms of what may be considered. Pretty all-encompassing. There's an ability to decline an application that's been submitted for referral, so it's not an automatic accept. The expert panel will make a recommendation with a report to the ministers, and the ministers can't deviate from that panel unless they have undertaken the analysis of the recommendation and conditions. So there is some rigour in there. Appeals against those decisions to decline are on questions of law only. And then Schedule 3 sets out the requirements for expert panels, and that talks about things like making the process as efficient as possible, making it as accessible and informal as possible. It talks about basically wanting to make it not too onerous, not too costly, not too time extensive. And then Schedule 4 sets out requirements for consents that would otherwise be RMA consent. So it basically says this, Schedule 4 says that this supersedes the RMA, and you can consider this to be an RMA consent. And it talks about if you've got an RMA consent and you apply for a fast track, you continue to operate under your RMA permit until you get your fast track provision. So Schedule 4 deals directly with that interface with the RMA. So in terms of our involvement, and Joe's going to jump in the next couple of slides, there's a number of places that we're involved. So pre-application consultation that we just spoke about before. So as a local authority, if it's a project in our area, then an applicant must consult with us, but they don't require our approval. The minister must have a look at that information, an invitation to comment during the panel process, and then we've got a compliance and monitoring role. So the back end role, once a consent has been issued. Is there anything in that slide you want to speak to, Jo?
I'll cover it up.
And then this one is definitely Joe. So we've got some existing fast track consenting.
Who pays for that time in that process?
Great question, Kate. There's real uncertainty at the moment, and that's part of the sector feedback. So if we looked at the legislation as it's written now, it would fall to ratepayers, or if we can set up an appropriate regime to recover our costs for that initial consultation with the applicant. But at the moment, once it's in the process, it's not cost recoverable, is my understanding.
So, but we don't, pre-consultation we don't charge now, so there wouldn't be any difference there, I think. Or do
So
we?
we have under our schedule of fees and charges, so the first half an hour is free, and then for large pre-applications with the applicant's agreement, we do set up a cost recovery for it. So there is a potential there, but once it's in our process with if it's been accepted, and then we are able to participate in the process, at the moment we can't recover our costs.
It's a difficulty, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So we have had experience operating under similar legislation. So this was the COVID-19 fast track legislation. So this was specific to RMA consenting, and it was introduced as part of helping the economy recover during COVID. So we have had 21 applications in Otago that have been approved to use this process, so quite a number. 10 of them have been approved, so they've gone through the entirety of this process. So our involvement with those was they may or may not have come and talked to us beforehand in terms of pre-application advice before entering into the process. But often what we would get would be some information from the EPA around we have a project, do you think it's appropriate for it to use this process, yes or no? Can you provide us some comments around what plans or rules and what information might be required? And then it would be approved to use the process. And then once it was in, we would then have a couple of opportunities to participate in the process. But we had to opt in at the start so that we had the potential to review the conditions at the end. So quite tight timeframes, and I'll speak to those positives and negatives at the bottom, but just thought I would give you an idea of the scale of projects that have been through the existing legislation. It's quite hard to know what projects may opt to go through the portal or may seek to be referred, but under this existing legislation, 3 stages of the new Dunedin Hospital have gone through the fast track process. The Northbrook Wanaka Retirement Village used it, the Queenstown Arterials project, so it was actually listed in the legislation. The others were referred projects. Silverlight Studios, and then we also had 2 stages of the Worm Tree development through in Central. So you can kind of get a flavour for the types of things that use the process. Largely district council TA type matters, but there were still parts of those that required consent from us, or that we wanted to provide some feedback around things around transport and how it related to our planning documents. So as I said, there's a few positives and negatives with the existing legislation, which sort of mirror through into the bill. So one of them, which we've spoken about, is we have the compliance and monitoring function for these consents, but we have very little involvement through that process. So we are sometimes left with a compliance and monitoring role where the conditions are not ones that we have seen or had any huge role in developing, and it can be quite tricky for us and the applicant as well. Often those consents are combined with consents that are required from other district councils, so it makes compliance and enforcement roles tricky for all parties. We are also then left with a compliance and monitoring role for a project that we haven't necessarily been significantly involved in, and that is also a matter too. If we get inquiries or questions about these projects, we have had very little involvement and understanding of them too. One of the other negatives is also that ability to cost recover. And they do take up a fair bit of time in terms of seeking comments from various departments, reading the applications, making sure we are providing really good advice through to the panel, and also making sure that we recommend independent decision makers when we're given the opportunity to. So certainty, some ability to cost recover is something that the sector is putting forward and has been a key issue with this process to date. I guess some of the other negatives might be viewed by others as positives, but decisions aren't made by council on these. Yes, they are made by independent decision makers, but they are not council. There is reduced public involvement, and also often we can provide feedback, but there's no guarantee that through the process that feedback is actually utilised. There have been some positives. There is a relationship that has been developed or further enhanced with other councils, because often these are joint projects. They do work for large scale and complex projects that need consents from a number of organisations. We don't have to resource such large scale projects in terms of our consenting function, and because there is reduced legal opportunities for appeal, there is reduced legal costs for us, but often we will be involved at the end of a process when we haven't been involved in the processing of that permit. So there is a potential under that legislation for us to be in court, but we haven't been involved in the consenting process. So that's the experience to date with the existing legislation, which has been used as a base for this bill.
Do you want to just talk about the time to respond?
Yes, and as Anita's prompted, timing issues as well. So we are given very short timeframes to respond to.
Too long or something like that.
Can I just jump in, Joe, please? Yeah. Just, when you talk about opting in and clearly you have that opportunity early on to signal that that is the case. To me, it would seem that you would want to, sorry, I'm just sort of jumping ahead, sort of more of an operational thing, but to me, it would seem that you would want to have that option available to you, particularly the panel responsible for setting the conditions. And it seems to me that's where, from a regulatory perspective and monitoring, etc., it's absolutely vital that we've got conditions that are workable and, respect our policies, etc. So that opting in, I think, is absolutely critical, and I'd be ticking that box with every application. So that's just me.
Yeah, and we have taken that up because we do want to see those conditions or provide feedback where we can. But in terms of this, there are really tight timeframes for getting that feedback through. Some of them are a week or less. And yeah, there are resourcing implications. We always provide the feedback, but I just wanted to provide the context in which we've been operating under this existing legislation to help inform what or if any submission we put forward. So thanks.
Thank you.
Before you, I see Kate's there as well. Did you want to just raise anything, talk about anything before you guys need to go?
I appreciate that this is seen as a big change. I think the wording, I just want to nuance the wording, that we can't keep on hitting back at things as government's doing. I just hope that we're going to be positively sending that message.
Yeah, so
If that makes sense.
this has high positive benefit.
Yeah,
Can do.
I'm all good, thanks, Gretchen.
Yeah. Thank you.
Cheers.
Right, we'll keep moving through. So the first area that we thought would be useful for you to discuss is just the anticipated impacts for ORC. So the Act can bypass all of our regional planning frameworks, policy statements, plans, FDS and the consents team. And we're just flagging that there are likely to be resourcing implications that we currently haven't provided for in the LTP in terms of activities. So at the moment, these processes are managed through the consents team, so through one person in Joe's team and Warren, depending on the nature and scale. Then we haven't resourced anything appropriately. There's just a few more points in this area that we'll just go through, and then then I'll stop talking. A concern with clause 17 is that those requirements for significance are just mays and not musts. And so any work that we've done doesn't necessarily need to be factored into their decision making or their consideration in terms of whether they accept something and to the fast track or not. Sorry, same point. This pre-application queries and consultations with the consents team and other teams if we need specialist input. The appeal scope on approvals will fall back onto local government to manage and resource. A lack of clarity on the ability to recover costs, and then just the challenges that Joe spoke to in terms of conditions that don't have our approval initially. So that is feedback area 1 that we're keen to get your thoughts about in terms of whether that will be something that you would like to put in a submission, and what your thoughts are on that one.
Yep, some people maybe just taking a little moment to think on those and read those, but I can see that Councillor Weir, you're wanting to talk to that, are you? Yeah. Sure.
I mean, I think those are all things we do want to talk about and mention. They're kind of a bit worrying. But I'm also just wondering if there's any like legal liability for the council. Obviously, I can't speak to the actual legal risk, but like, are there any worries about the liability for council for projects that do get approved, and then we've got the responsibility for them that they could be challenged and stuff, and that would fall on us?
Yeah, so and thanks, we saw that question pre-circulated. As far as the bill reads, the situation is the same as if it were a consent under any other act. So the assumption is that any liabilities that you'd have under the RMA would carry through. There's not, in terms of legal risk, I don't consider there to be anything different to what there would be that we currently have. Some of the challenges are more around operational things, so conditions that are challenging to monitor, whether people are complying with them or not when you haven't been part of developing them.
Another would be, oh sorry, Councillor Somerville, another would be around the ability to set bonds. You know how we do that for like these would, I'd imagine, be quite large projects. And often we do have bonds so that if something goes wrong, then we can do some fixing up, I suppose, of issues. So how does that work?
So my assumption would be that anything that could be a condition under the RMA can be a condition under the fast track approvals. There is a sense that things like bonds may not be as favoured in terms of, being seen as a bit of an impediment to, but I don't think there's any restriction on actually enforcing or requesting a bond to be imposed.
Yeah, it would just rely on the expert panel to put that forward, and then it also should then go through that final step of it actually being approved as an appropriate condition that isn't too onerous on the applicant.
Yeah, just that again, us not being involved and being able to seek and help to suggest suggestions. I suppose it falls into that category as well. Councillor Somerville.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really very major concern that this, I think you have summarised on the previous slide, can bypass our plans and things that we have in place. Because of course we have those in place for very good reasons. You mentioned before, Anita, about prohibited activities. We have a bit more explanation, because the suggestion was that even prohibited activities, what sorts of things could they be, in what cases could they happen?
Yeah, sure. So section 17(5) says a project is not ineligible just because the project includes an activity that is a prohibited activity under the RMA. And what I would say in my experience with prohibited activities is they're very rarely included in plans. It's a very rigorous test to make something prohibited. So in my lay terms, the test is you need to have a high level of certainty that the project would never ever be an appropriate thing. An activity would never be appropriate to be undertaken, and therefore you can make it prohibited. In Central Otago, I saw a prohibited activity go on Lodge Pine Tree, which sounds slightly odd, but they've got a really high propensity for wilding. So there's prohibited activity there. I've seen a couple around nuclear power. So they're the types of quite disparate activities, a pine tree and a nuclear power, but they're the, there's a really high bar to get to a prohibited activity, and it goes through quite a robust process currently. This says that doesn't make you eligible for coming through. So things that have been prohibited can still apply for a fast track approval.
But in Otago, it sounds, am I interpreting this right? We don't have a whole lot of things that we are prohibiting.
DCC on the top.
Some of the water space.
Yeah, there are some, but I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what those activities are in for, but there are some, especially where it relates to activities through water conservation orders as well. So, yeah.
And Warren's just highlighted that we have not long worked through a reasonably long process on appeals on the DCC plan to get a couple of prohibited activities for development in flood hazard areas and known flood hazard areas. So
Right.
those are the sorts of issues. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
No questions online, no. Oh, sorry, councillor Malcolm.
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, I'm just wondering, you say about resourcing. If we don't have this bill in place, so we'll resource to what we think we're normally going to do, but then all of a sudden 2 or 3 big projects come along, within the next 5 to 10 years, do we not just do a variation to our long-term plan and resource at an annual plan?
Yeah, I mean, you can absolutely change your budgets through an annual plan process. It's so that's one solution. But what I guess the challenge we're highlighting is if something comes in and we're not resourced, other work has to stop or be delayed or be outsourced. And the other challenge we have is that we've set out on the assumption of particular types of work. And if we're doing different work, then we've funded it in the way that we might. So it's not that we can't going forward adjust it. It's more that reactionary space. And the other challenge too is those big projects, if they were going to come into us for a consent, we would have been able to cost recover. Whereas if they come in through the fast track, we don't necessarily know that we can do that. So there could be a discrepancy between what we could have done under the RMA and what we can do under the fast track approvals bill.
Yeah, and it's not just a consenting team. If we are providing those initial pre-comments, that will stretch into other teams across council, and as Anita said, they've got anticipated work programs as well. I do know other councils are looking at setting up specific teams for this work, and I may have to recruit to do that. So I guess it gives you a taste of how other councils are potentially looking at this in terms of volume of work.
Yeah, so to me that seems completely contrary to what the Act is trying to do. So if tomorrow I come in with a project to build some infrastructure in the Waitaki, you've got your standard way of charging me in that process. So would we still not use that now? Someone comes in for this, they've got to come to us anyway. They've got to consult with us. They've got to go consult with us, and they've got to get information from us, and they've got to go through that process. So would we not just be charging them like normal? And I know that may not be written in this bill as it is, but surely that's all we need to have in that bill. We don't need a department sitting there waiting for something big to come through, because something big may never come through.
Well, suggesting that more an example of what another council is doing. So yeah, we would be able to cost recover for the initial consultation if we are able to set that up as a pre-application activity. And there's just some uncertainty there, and I think that speaks to the sector submission. But once the project is referred and it's been accepted, we won't have any ability to cost recover for our time on that. So yes, that first part we could. At the moment, anything beyond that, we won't be able to cost recover. So there will be an impact on our areas that are not cost recovering that money.
So isn't the isn't the actual question then to the bill writers is how do we cost recover from that stage onwards?
Yeah, and that's part of that sector submission is getting the certainty around that, and that's one of the options here for you to consider as a group if you want to put that forward in any submission you may seek to make.
Yeah, because I don't look. I think like this is a terrible local government way of doing things. Of just and the council that is doing it should have a good hard look at themselves by just adding up and putting another team in place, because there may not actually be any. This would be a classic case of ensure we can get cost recovery, and for that particular project, you'll probably get a consultant team in because it isn't business as usual, and it's specifically for a set project, and it would have a defined period of time. So it's really just ensuring we've got the mechanisms to cost recover at the appropriate levels.
Yeah, and I think that's just what we're looking for feedback in terms of if you're going to lodge a submission, so all we're trying to do is highlight some of the challenges that have been identified in the bill and identify whether or not as an organisation you are comfortable lodging a submission that says, hey, we need to make this cost recoverable so the burden doesn't fall on our general ratepayers and it falls on the person undertaking the activity.
Yep.
So yeah, we're pretty keen for the principle of I guess who gets the most benefit to be paying, don't we? So it sounds as though Kevin as well, that's kind of the space that you're in. We're not aiming to create a whole lot of bureaucracy in the council, but we are aiming to solve that problem of where the costs should lie. And it could be quite significant costs and compliance, follow-ups. We don't know, but if they're big projects, then highly likely. So yeah, it probably does sound like a good place, and supporting the Te Ura Kahika's submission points and building on that sounds all right to me. Does that sound all right to you, Kevin?
Yeah, I'm probably against quite a few of what they've submitted on, especially after reading the bill. I think they're overprotective of their own space, I think. What we've got to be protective of is the costs, but I think a lot of things that they're saying are actually going against the intent of the bill, really. So yeah, cost recoveries. Yeah, I hopefully we're doing a separate submission rather than the same as theirs.
So that's what we're aiming for here. So
yeah, cool. Yep.
That's good to feed in a flavour for Otago, and we're doing that. So thanks, Kevin. Lloyd.
Yeah, no, it's good. I'm pretty much on side with the cost recovery discussion we just had. But what I was wondering was, in the very first point up there, like the pre-application, is there any way that we as a council can provide information to the panel, or to the ministers or the panel, as to what effects a specific application may have, like good and bad?
I think we could probably provide a case study in our submission, potentially, if we could potentially generalise it and say this is our experience with the bill and these are the sorts of hours or costs we've incurred if we're, promoting a cost recovery. Is that what you're?
Yeah, I'm more thinking about like if there's a consent comes in for a large infrastructure project in a wetland area, okay, something like that. So, it's going to, at that stage, would we have the ability to have an input as into some information around how that application may progress?
So yes, certainly through those pre-application processes, we do provide comments to the applicant in terms of risks around locations or things that they may want to consider. Ultimately, in that stage of the process, that information goes to the applicant. Whether or not that should then also go through to the ministers responsible or the expert panel, I'm not sure. But if it's not a step that's there, that could be something that we put forward in terms of ensuring that our feedback at that pre-application stage goes to both parties and not just the applicant.
So my gut feeling is that, you know, matters of environmental importance, that we want to be able to have a system or a process whereby we can get our viewpoint heard as well.
Yes, yeah, and we have, for our pre-application activities, we have a standard, if they're of this scale, we do have a standard template that we provide that information back to the applicant. So whatever format the legislation comes in as being, we would look to set up something of that same process. Yep.
And we may even, like, just following up on what Gretchen was saying earlier as well, we may, you know, setting bonds, etc. There might be some environmental offsetting or that sort of opportunities that may be there as well. So it's just really so that it's not, it's just really so that we don't get large scale projects in risk zones without having any import or without having the ability to express our concerns if we have concerns.
So I think there's two different stages. So the pre-application is important, but I think if we go back a few slides, there's no need for the applicant to get consensus from us.
No.
They have to come and seek our comments, and we would obviously at that stage raise whatever issues we might need to raise and talk about the sort of things that might be a risk, and flag with them that if and when it gets into the formal process, we will be asked for formal comment. So that's what's happened through the COVID bill. So once there's a pre-application conversation and the back and forth around this is what we're thinking, what do you think in terms of your plans and your assessments in terms of environmental impacts and those sorts of things, and we would provide them a whole lot of information. They'll be packaging that up and then sending it through to apply to go into the fast track process. If it gets accepted, we'll get a formal opportunity to provide comment to the expert panel. And that's not filtered. That's just and that's how the COVID process worked, is that Joe's team worked with science and engineering or whoever else and provided a suite of assessments on a particular project for the expert panel to consider when they were making their decision. So the first part's informal, if you want to talk about it that way, and it's trying to get some agreement with the applicant on some of those big things and encourage them to consider certain things and offer certain things. And then we get our formal chance, which is not filtered by the applicant. It's a direct communication with the expert panel saying, here is our assessment of the matters that are relevant to us, and the TLA will do the same thing on matters relevant to them. And then if there's other non-RMA, like Conservation Act, there might be other departments also providing reports, and then the commissioners have to weigh all those up and make a decision. So we almost get an informal and then a formal opportunity, and it's just around how we make best use of that.
So that formal opportunity is written in the bill.
Yeah, so that pre-application consultation stage and the other stages is in the bill. It is a positive with this legislation that pre-application consultation is there. We have had really good engagement from people in Otago using the COVID-19 legislation, but it wasn't a requirement. So it does make that initial pre-application stage that a lot of those parties in Otago have taken up, which is really good. They've made it mandatory for this approval process.
Given, is your hand up still? Because you'd like.
Yep. It's been down and up again. Richard, just interested in the comment you made that in the application, the ORC's points will not be filtered by the applicant. They wouldn't be able to filter what we've said to them, would they?
No, look, it's when I say that, the initial pre-lodgement conversations are between us and the applicant. So there's no involvement from the panel. So filter's probably a poor choice of words, Kevin.
That's right.
It's a different conversation. We have to It's probably a better way.
That cool. Thank you.
Councillor Weir.
Yeah, I think I'm very comfortable with that. To take a submission of the points that I've made, I think very good points that we should copy into our submission, but there might be things that we want to add. I just wanted to check my understanding on a few of the things from slides earlier, if that's all right. When one of the points earlier was that it was identified as a priority project was one of the like potential
Yep. Yep.
criteria for being included.
Yep.
Does that just who's identifying
So
that project?
The
Is it-
clause says the joint ministers may consider whether the project has been identified as a priority project in a central government, local government or sector plan or strategy, for example, in a general policy statement or spatial strategy or central government infrastructure priority list.
Cool. Okay. And then the panel in the bill mentions that there'll be someone from the local authority. Does that mean us as a regional council or just the TLAs would be represented on the panel?
From memory, it requires the local authority to nominate one person.
Yeah.
But it doesn't specify which, so if it was an application that involved a TA and a regional council, I'm not sure if there's clarity on that.
No, and I can only speak to experience with that process to date. Normally, we would work with the other councils around just nominating the same person based on their skill set and qualifications as an independent decision maker. Largely the ones that we've handled to date, obviously separate process and separate legislation, have been largely TA based in terms of the scale of the activities, and we've supported the qualified independent decision maker that they put forward, but it hasn't been a councillor decision maker. Again, it's separate legislation for fast tracks, but they have been projects with quite long time, like short time frames, but also quite long in terms of the volume of work that the panels have had to get through. So, yeah, there's been some feedback from those decision makers separate to this around that fast track process.
So it's not clear who's nominating who for the panel. Okay.
And from memory, and I'm just trying to find it, the panel size is 4, but it does have a proviso for having a larger panel if needed for a particular reason to get the right skill set and things like that. So I think there is some discretion in there.
And then in terms of our input, so we've got that informal like comments and chats with the applicant basically, which they can ignore. And then we've got the formal comment to the expert panel, which they have to take on board, but obviously doesn't dictate their final decision. And then even if they do take on board our comments and recommend the application be rejected, there's nothing stopping the minister from overriding that the expert panel decision. Is that right?
No, so the provision is provided the ministers have undertaken the analysis of the recommendations and conditions, then they can deviate. So it
And
says
what is that?
must not
analysis?
unless, doesn't dictate, doesn't set out anything more than that. Just,
They can do whatever analysis they want and then reject the recommendation if they want to.
seems to be the case, yeah.
Yeah, but I think the wording is the panel is not bound to take into consideration what we say. They may.
Right, so even that, so we've got no real say.
Yeah, so this is where quite detailed about RMA language is important. So when it says may, it's discretionary, but if language say would be changed to must, then that actually has a huge impact on what the minister or the decision maker has to do.
And so that's in section 25, 4 and 5 of the bill, and so it says in determining a substantive application, the joint ministers may refer a part or the whole of the panel's recommendations back to reconsider and give the panel any directions the ministers think appropriate as to the reconsideration of a part or the whole.
Honestly, I think this bill kind of fundamentally undermines our role as local government and our roles in all of these bills and stuff if they can put in a project at the moment and disregard all of our plans that we've worked on and stuff and a bunch of other legislation. So I definitely want us to be pushing for a real actual say in the process in our submission.
Yeah, I do think that's a fair comment, that communities do create plans and they take years and years to come to agreement on. So we do want to have some regard for what we've currently got in our plans. Yep.
I think the other point I just note is even if an application is declined, it can come back in. So they can readjust and come back in to address concerns, which is the same as an RMA. You can have your application declined and amend it and come back in and do those things. So that's available anyway.
But they could take an application that was rejected and not change it at all, and then go through the fast track process, right?
That's right, yeah.
Just while we're on, just while we're on that panel function, that's probably worth clarifying too, that the panel can ask, as I understand it, right up to before they make their recommendation for further information that will kick off another, going back to the parties, let them have a look at it, give feedback. So it's not just like, you know, a one and done with the feedback. We might get that 1, 2, 3, it depends how complex the large project is potentially. So just from a resourcing consideration too. It could be several bites of the cherry, so to speak.
Hard to plan for, coming back to some of the points Councillor Malcolm was making about just resourcing, work programs, efficiencies. Yeah, you're not sure what you're getting into, and you've already said a work program that can be quite challenging. Yeah. Right, so can I just check in where we're at on this workshop? So how I'm trying, my iPad is still trying to upload the slides to see how much more we've got. So
there's another couple of topics that we think is useful to discuss. One of them is consultation, which actually you've traversed quite a bit in terms of that discussion you've just had. So we'll just get through to that one. Currently the opportunities for public involvement is quite limited. Hearings are not mandatory. Greater weight goes to the purpose of this bill than other bills. Limited appeal rights, but the bill does have a focus on the recognition of settled treaty claims. Does put an impact on those still awaiting settlement. We just got one slide on. So there's just one slide on consultation. So any thoughts in terms of, I think you've just traversed the fact that our plans go through a robust process, and if they're not considered and there's not an opportunity to consider those plans, then that makes a challenge. So we can put together some feedback on that in terms of a submission, but just interested to see if there's anything else in that space that you'd like us to have a think about.
Councillor Malcolm.
Yeah, look, I think there's plenty of consultation right throughout the process, actually. And I think one of the biggest downfalls of the RMA, the way it's practiced, is too many people get too much time to actually stop things happening. So, look, I think there's plenty of checks and balances in place, and right throughout that process. So, I think there is plenty of public involvement. I'm actually not too. I'm not too worried about forcing them to, because I think the panel, I'm sure the panel will take note of what the current, they will be assessing a plan and seeing, or a project, and assessing why they haven't just gone through a straight consenting process, and that will obviously show them what is planned within what the current regional authorities plans have. So I think all that will be assessed. So I'm confident that they'll adhere to the appropriate parts. But this is about getting things going, and we don't. I'm really not worried about resourcing because we actually don't know what innovative people have actually got planned over the next 5 to 10 years. So we'll just resource appropriately at the time. And my biggest worry is still just making sure we have some traction in the bill that we can get reasonable costs back. Yeah.
Just on that one, it's not particularly just regional councils, but I think more locally, there's quite a bit of discussion around the value that comes back to local communities from large projects. So let's say there was currently, if you had a large project and it had some perhaps infrastructural cost, some impacts. Of course it's going to, because it's big, it's in a big area, it requires roads, it requires whatever. There is some value that is worked through that goes back to the local community, I suppose, as well. I guess if you had a project that came in that was even possibly international, the money doesn't go necessarily to locally that much. There might be a few jobs, but possibly not heaps. And there might be some royalties, I don't know, and they might go centrally and they might not go locally. And then there's a whole lot of other costs that the local communities need to pay for, as well as for the compliance and the interaction throughout the hearings, etc. So there's definitely a counter locally, as well as the benefits that we could see. So I think there is some moderation of whether or not it's all going to be brilliant for for the local communities. Quite maybe good overall for more of a national setting, perhaps. But yeah, we do need to be mindful of all of that stuff as well. But yeah, so here we are on this one here, consultation area. Is there any specific feedback on this bit? Councillor Sunville.
Yeah, thanks. Look, I'm very concerned about the lack of consultation, and particularly, I guess, that third dot there, that the greater weighted purpose of the bill, which I understand is around enabling development. And so where we've already referred to this places in the legislation that says may rather than must, I think that's a danger that I guess, all right, development here, but those environmental protections can be missed, and to find ways of ensuring that that voice environmental protection can find its way in at every stage of the process. And I'm concerned that it may be lacking at the moment, and particularly as a regional council where our main function is around environmental management.
Councillor Malcolm.
Yeah, look, I just think after just listening to the Ingrid, I think one thing we need to go back to is actually the purpose of the bill. And the purpose, it does say that it's got to be significant regional or national benefits. So if it was just a building, something being plopped somewhere and everything was going overseas, well, I don't think that would pass the test. So I think we just need to highlight that it would need to, that we would, they would need to show that it was having those regional and national benefits.
Yeah, I think my point is the both rather than the if, say, for example, I'm not trying to pick on the royalties type situation only. But
No, I realise that.
Yeah, that we didn't see the benefit locally would be the worry, I suppose, for some projects, and we had to foot the bills. Yeah, that's
yes, but then doesn't that also go back to our mechanisms that we've got in place? Around development contributions, around our charges, around our rates. So we've also got to make sure that those are being applied proportionally to the magnitude of the effects that development will bring.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and Anita, I see you're about to answer on that, but regional councils can't upfront costs, first of all. Second of all, I'm not sure that the district councils can either, but we're not talking about them here in this setting.
So a TA will have a development contributions policy, but in order to realise that policy, they have to have scheduled the infrastructure, has to be for infrastructure that they are required to build, and has to be in the LTP, and they have to have started that infrastructure within 10 years, or they have to refund the money that they've collected under the DC's policy. So it's not quite that straightforward. There is provision in this Act for consultation. So it's any person that you consider might be impacted. But the other point just to highlight is that there is part 2, section 32 does set out a hierarchy. So basically the priority purpose is the purpose of the SAC. The RMA is then second, and then a panel must consider the effects on the environment. So there is still a requirement in there to consider that. It's not completely removed. It's different. I think it's important to note it is in there, but the effects on the environment aren't the predominant driver. It's the purpose of the Act, which is to deliver infrastructure for projects that have a regional or national significance. But there is still an environmental lens in it.
Thanks, Anita. I can see Alexa, you've had your hand up for a wee while, then we can come back to Kevin. Thanks.
Thanks. I have some sympathy for the difficulties that everyone experiences with the RMA, but I'm really worried about this bill rolling over our existing plans. And I know you explained this before, Anita, but I'm not sure if I fully got it. And that is about the how does this legislation have to consider and respond to our plans? I think it doesn't, does it?
No, so at the moment, the joint ministers may consider whether the project is consistent with local or regional planning documents, including spatial strategies. So it's something that they may consider, and they may consider whether it's consistent. It's not a requirement that they consider those plans. It's not a requirement that they make a decision that is consistent with those plans either.
Yeah, I think I heard that and saw that before that you presented, and I'm sorry it's taken me this long to flick up to it. But that really worries me, that part, that all of the work that has been done by the community to put its plans together, and then for them not to have to consider them. So maybe we want to put something in about that.
What section is that bit in, Anita?
So that's section 17.
17 in there, right?
Councillor Weir.
Yeah, just continuing off what Alexa said, I mean, considering is one thing, but giving effect to or even responding to is another. And same with there being a lot of mays and not many musts in there as well. So maybe that's some wording that we could recommend being changed. But I think, you know, there's absolutely zero meaningful checks and balances that don't any real public involvement. And like you guys said, there's no definition there of regional or national benefit. You know, apparently gold mines and coal mines and offshore oil all of regional and national benefits, but it doesn't mean that the community wants them or that they align with our goals as a regional council and any of the other local governments. I think we should ask, you know, in our submission that become honour that commitment to local decision making and local voice better through this bill, but also especially both our and the central government's treaty obligations. They'll, you know, pays lip service to some of them, but certainly not all of them. And I think we need to push, we've got an obligation to push government to better honour Te Tiriti in this bill, which would probably require dramatically restructuring the whole bill, but I think we've got rules.
Yeah, maybe I'll just provide some advice on that. And ultimately, the submission will be driven by the table, but I think there's just some things to consider. One is that the messaging around this bill is very clear in terms of what they're trying to achieve. And so when we are submitting, my suggestion would be to focus on within the bill what are the key improvements we would like to see. There can be some supplementary commentary if the council chooses to around, you know, the sort of higher level intent and concerns, but I think the message is very clear that this bill is happening, and they are looking at a modified version of the COVID fast track because they see some benefits in that. So picking out those specific things within the bill that are important to us in terms of our function as a regional council is where I would be putting the focus. And we've heard around cost recovery is one, because that will have a big impact on us. I think we'll see a number of projects go through this process, and it'll be good for us to ensure that we can recover those costs and then that they're not borne by the ratepayer. I think some clarity, we've got to remember there is an independent expert panel put together for these, so there is a level of rigor in there, and it's ensuring that they have the ability to consider the right things and to consider our view on those projects, and our expert view around how those projects fit with our plans is part of the function that our staff undertake. So I appreciate there are some higher level concerns with the bill. My recommendation to the table, though, is still to focus the submission on what within that bill you would like to see refined to ensure we have the best opportunity to influence that process, because I think the message very strongly is the process is happening. And therefore our role, our submission should be focusing on, well, what things in that bill do we think could be refined so we get a better chance to input and then a fair chance for recovery of our resources. But it doesn't stop you addressing some of those high level concerns. I just think I would also be focusing on specific changes within the draft bill.
I think that's the opportunity that presents itself to us, doesn't it? So, yeah, being focused on refining and giving some good feedback there does seem to be the most likely to succeed strategy as well. So, yeah, being as helpful as we can within our world, which is the work that we do with our communities and the way that we want to ensure that we that we have good principles, I suppose, around who pays for what and who gets the value of these. Councillor McCall, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, just a question from me. Just for my own clarity. So basically, as a council, we have input into the panel as a right.
Yep.
Okay, and then when the panel then makes its recommendations to the suite of ministers to make the decision. So my question is that panel's decision then transparent to the public prior to the minister's decision?
So I don't think it won't be public till it's been made, is my understanding. That's the general course of things. But what the bill does say is before a panel recommends a consent is approved, they must provide a copy of its draft conditions.
Yep.
So if you've been invited to provide comments, you get a copy of the draft conditions. So anyone who's involved there, but like any RMA process or any consenting process, until it's approved, they're not generally made public.
So because before we talked about affected parties, the panels to talk with affected parties, and so what you're saying is the panel then makes their decision that goes to the ministers, and the ministers have to report back to the affected party prior to a decision being made.
Yeah, so what the bill says is for a listed project, a panel must invite comments from the relevant local authorities, the relevant iwi authorities, treaty settlement authorities, anyone in a customary marine title area, protected customary rights areas, the owners of the land on which the project is to be undertaken and the land adjacent to that land, the occupiers of the land on which it's to be undertaken, and then there's a whole list of Crown ministers, the Director General of Conservation, any requiring authority, and then a panel may invite written comments from any other person the panel considers appropriate. So there's a list of musts, and then there's the may.
I'm just trying to work out the transparency to the process prior to between the panel and the minister's decision. So because the minister has to, so the minister makes a decision different to the panel, they have to justify it somewhere.
Yeah, what's that, Steve?
Provide an analysis.
Yeah, yeah, as
They can do
to,
whatever they want.
That might be one question too hard at this point. Yeah, there's certainly provisions in the bill in terms of how you make the decision public and things like that, but we might have to come back to on that one.
It's certainly different to say your consent process where you make a formal notification decision around public or affected party approvals, but that's just reflecting that it's a different type of legislation for a different scale of project, but we'll come back to you on that one.
I guess where I'm coming from, I think it's important that if a fast track decision is made, that the public can see the background to the decision coming through the process from the panel to the ministers, and if there has been a significant change, that it's actually open and transparent.
So what I would say is an RMA consent process is public information. What I'm not sure about is whether that public information or how the GOIMA applies to this sort of stuff. So we'll have a look at that and we'll come back to in terms of transparency in there.
Thank you. Councillor Ford.
I'm just sort of looking at this and going, well, what goes into the submission? And, you know, from a high level view, it looks like we get to get our plans ignored and get to pay for that privilege, and that worries me greatly. So I guess what's important to be in there is the cost recovery, as has been mentioned already. And I'd also like to see mandatory consideration of our plans. And I think this bill needs to consider the all regional councils' role as environmental protectors, guardians in some way. Regional and national benefits, I think, need to be articulated in terms of environmental benefits as well as just economic, which worries me that this is going down a solely economic track, and I think it needs to have environmental benefits as well to be fast-tracked. I don't think you should be able to fast-track things without that. Many projects that are out there can support strong environmental outcomes, and I would like to see preference for those written into this bill. So that's what I'm thinking at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got another feedback area as well. Have we to go? Is there anything else anyone wants to say on this one? Doesn't seem to be. We, as you said anyway, Anita, this is a getting to know the bill, I suppose, giving a bit of initial thought, but we've got a bit more time as well. So yeah, let's move on to the next one. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Gretchen. I didn't just on that last one.
Screen. Sorry, Kevin. Go for it.
Yeah. No, my fault. Hey, just on that last bullet point, Anita, the bill has a focus on recognition of treaty claims, which would disadvantage those still awaiting settlement. I sort of read that a wee bit differently, but can you lead me to where that is?
Do you know where you picked that one up?
Well, that's in various places. That's
I know that that's written in that submission we're sort of having a look at, but when I read it, I thought they were pretty much covered. But
So that's section 13. That's that.
We'll just,
but I'm quite comfortable. I'm quite comfortable with a question going back to them. How are those iwi awaiting settlement of treaty claims to be accommodated? Something along those lines. I think that question needs to be, if in fact my interpretation is different to yours.
yeah. So yeah, I was just pointing out section 13 sets out treaty settlements, and then there's another couple of places in terms of when you're considering decisions, you must consider treaty settlements and stuff. But I think we can incorporate that angle that you've just identified. So anyone that's in this settlement claims process have some consideration as well.
And
Yeah, and they make, yeah, cool. Thank you.
Alrighty, next consultation area.
Yeah, so this one's a bit more straightforward, and I'm gonna throw to Gavin in a moment. But in essence, there are opportunities for ORC. We consider there are any projects that we would like to get on the fast track approvals bill. That's a separate process. So I had mistakenly assumed that if we had submitted something, it would track across, but you need to do that separately through the portal by the 3rd of May. And that resilience climate change area is one area that the sector's looking at. So I'll just get Gavin to speak to that.
Thanks, Gavin.
Yes, we do have some projects that would, on the face of it, meet the eligibility criteria for inclusion. because we aren't just a regulator, we're a doer. And we have responsibilities under the Soil Conservation and Rivers Control Act. So there are at least a couple of projects in our draft infrastructure strategy that would benefit from a delivery point of view in terms of being fast tracked and having a simpler consent process. So a decision needs to be made as to whether we would include that in that portal by the 3rd of May. There happen to be projects that are also subject to the central government co-investment bid as well.
Yeah, I was just considering that on whether the best way is to do it each council individually on little-ish projects, or whether there's another way that's bigger and makes resilience projects across the sector somehow fit a criteria, but it might be different from this fast tracking legislation. I guess the opportunity presents itself though on those specific projects. Now, I haven't thought about this enough to be able to think strategically what's the best approach there, but you probably have. And yeah, there does seem to be a couple of projects that ORC could consider. Yeah. How do others feel on this?
I guess we're talking.
Yeah. Sorry.
I guess we're talking projects included in the deluge report. And that's so what I'm saying is, do we do that as a sector as a whole, or do we go individually, I guess, isn't it?
So in my sense, they're individual projects that require individual approvals, so it'll be up to each council. And I imagine that the river managers will be discussing this in the background, because there is some conversations around the use of this fast track bill to support infrastructure that needs to be delivered. But I think my advice, and Gavin, if there's been a slightly different conversation, feel free to, but we need to make that decision on our own, because it's our application to make.
Yeah, time is of the essence. The prudent thing to do might be to list out 2 or 3 projects, give them a schedule, and in parallel, there's a bigger conversation around whether the program overall would qualify as a package.
Yep, we wouldn't want to miss the opportunity. Thanks, Councillor Malcolm.
Yeah, look, I suppose that I understand where Gavin's coming from, but I suppose the key criteria that will be the funding options. Because possibly the only way we could fast track something, I'm not talking about the consenting process, I'm talking about the doing process, is if we had the availability of the money. So it's probably automatically linked, our projects are automatically linked to the funding, to central government funding, I suppose, Gavin. So therefore, if it was an NZTA or whoever was assisting us with that funding, we would then want to be able to fast track it. But if we haven't got the funding, do we need to fast track it? That's the balance, I suppose, I'm thinking of.
Yes, so the projects wouldn't be fast. The projects I've got in mind are continuing our contour channel work on the Taieri, Kaikorai Stilling Basin work that's totaled about $12 million. We wouldn't be fast tracking the projects, we would be seeking to fast track the consenting that is needed to do that work.
I think that's probably similar to a lot of projects that may be on the potential fast tracking list that they haven't actually got all the money behind them at this point, but they are looking to see whether they can have a consent, which then sometimes generates the money. So it's, yeah, chicken and egg. Yep, thanks.
Yes, Gretchen, just adding to that, look, before I consider that, I'd probably really want to know why that sort of project, which is infrastructure for the protection of people and property and the likes, is actually on a slow track. And I wonder, do we actually need to look at that just as an internal operation, as why that is slow and how we can expedite it, and are there other mechanisms within the existing framework that we can use? I'd really want to examine that. yeah, I'd really want to examine that to see why that is such a drawn out process and how we can expedite it. And if we do need to expedite it, or if we can't expedite it, well, that probably shows exactly why this bill's in place. It's just a bit scary to me, really, that something like that would take so long. Just a thought.
Councillor Malcolm, that's probably a separate matter, but yeah, I guess consents do take some time, and that's why fast tracking, exactly as you said, fast tracking legislation's been considered for some infrastructure projects, I guess. Yeah. Is there anything else to mention?
Yeah, I think, Kevin, that you've touched on a fundamental point with the whole conversation. It's not on a slow track, it's on a track that resource management framework. That enables various parts of the process that the fast track process is trying to speed up. So it's not that it's on slow track. It would, because I don't think that's the right term. It's
no. I'm sorry. I'm not, Richard. I'm not having a crack at staff on that. I'm just saying that, you know, the general RMA process and yeah.
So I think really then it just comes back to, are we interested in putting it forward for this new process? Or are we happy to work through existing processes, and the regional sector as a whole is of the view that these type of projects do meet those criteria for this new bill, and therefore if it's an option, it should be one that councils consider. But it's up to each council to make that decision.
Thank you, Gavin.
Yes, I could also add that the land and water plan is a discussion for whether regionally significant infrastructure of the type we deliver should be treated differently to other sorts of infrastructure. So that's your process for thinking about that. The other thing is getting a consent is not an obligation to exercise. So if we've got the consent, we're not compelled then to, under this thing, to actually deliver that.
Yep, no, good points. Alexa.
At the risk of leaping onto my hobby horse about Queenstown Transport, there are projects that are actually in our long-term, a regional long-term transport plan, or Queenstown's one anyway, I'm not sure if they actually know of, about offline transport options, such as gondola or whoosh or any of those sorts of things. And we do know the importance of getting some offline transport in Queenstown, and some of that is really difficult consenting wise. You know, a gondola going over people's houses, for example. And I wonder if there's an opportunity to have a look at what those things are, and to see if we might start thinking about them in a fast track. I mean, it's equally applicable to consenting for cycle trails and things. And I just wonder if there's thought going into that. I don't know how far advanced any of our plans in those areas are, but it'd be quite amazing if we could fast track the consenting.
So I think the key thing is that the application for fast track would be undertaken by the agency or company or individual delivering the project. So we might support those through the RLTP or through our other strategies or policies, but we wouldn't be looking to insert them unless we were the delivery agency and confident that we were going to be taking responsibility for delivery. We would have a chance to input through pre-lodgement and then the process, but I think it's up to those agencies, whether it be, for your examples, Alexa, whether it be QLDC or an alternative party looking for offline transport, they are the ones that would identify this fast track process and then put that, lodge that through that process. It wouldn't be for us to do that on someone else's behalf.
Thanks, Richard. Of course, that's correct. Thank you.
And also, if it were ever a public transport option, that's not at this moment. So Gavin's identified some that are at this moment. That one could be.
Yep, sure. Good, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add is even if there's a decision not to lodge anything through the portal, it doesn't take away the ability to get into the fast track process. So we can still make a referral request for anything down the track that OSC may have scope to do.
And the converse of that is, even if you are in the legislation, you wouldn't have to make use of that process. So even if you apply through the portal and are listed, you could still seek to follow another consenting process if you wanted to. I think, based on the legislation.
So yeah, we're not voting here on this one, but a general steer so far seems to be that those projects you've outlined a couple. I don't know if there's others as well that might be down the pipeline, but yeah, obviously seeking consent costs money itself too. So we don't just do it for ones that we don't think are, viable or short term. Yep. So to me, it seems reasonable as an idea. Anyone else? Councillor McCall?
Well, you know, I was just gonna say, it's all good, but I don't really think in a submission is a place to be flagging these things. Probably something should be flagged
Yeah, so it wouldn't be
outside
in-
the submission
It wouldn't be in
process,
the
yeah.
submission, you can't get them into the portal via the submission, you have to lodge them separately, so it would need to be a separate decision made.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying, is I don't know that we need to make mention of it in the submission.
No, and we're not intending to.
Yeah, I think that it's being flagged as something we should consider. It's not part of the submission
No.
and it
Yeah,
would
it's not.
require
Yeah.
Gavin effectively identifying what that process would look like. We probably need to have a chat about that in terms of the decision that's needed to then formally put
Yeah.
these forward.
Yeah, and we even lined up, how the timelines compare conventional process versus fast track or how
Yeah.
that looks.
Okay.
I guess it's probably just a matter of just being consistent in the submission because we're wearing two hats. One is a regulator and one is a doer.
And again, speaks to
That's
Anita's
true.
point that if we miss that portal, it doesn't prevent those projects. And it may be, once we have a look at it, that there's a little bit more work that needs to be done to give them the best chance of being included. And that therefore we might go through that secondary process that isn't the portal, it's the other application.
I think there's definitely opportunities there. It's probably something that we need to do internally is to have the discussions with the people that, people that make the decisions, I guess, or the people around fast tracking consenting and whether it's an opportunity or not to be taken up.
Yeah, get Gavin's point, that's quite a good one that we need to be thinking about opportunities and then refining as well through our submission because yeah, we do wear two hats, that's right, and we are an enabler, but we're also a guardian as well. So yeah, we just need to be really careful with what we're saying. That's true. And this is a matter for a formal discussion and formal decision for the council. So we probably don't need to deal with it specifically at this point. We got some hands up. Councillor Somerville, did you have your hand up? Okay, Councillor Weir.
I was just wanting to ask, if there was a reason why we would schedule it like through the portal rather than referring it, if the regional sector is pushing for only referring being the pathway.
Yeah, I think it's just reflecting Gavin's point that one hat is a regulator and one is a doer, and the Rivers SIG are actively having discussions about whether or not they can get anything through. And at the moment, both pathways are open, so the opportunity is literally there.
Yeah, it's my job to deliver stuff when I see an opportunity, so I'm going to maximise opportunity.
So is it not, it's not possible for us to refer our own projects?
Yeah, we can, the referral avenue is open, irrespective of whether you or not you're on the portal. So so if the portal option doesn't pan out, but projects that Gavin is tasked to deliver would benefit from a fast track process.
Oh, so the
We can
referral's
still,
not open
we can
yet,
still
so
work
it's-
it, yeah.
No, that makes sense.
So we've just got a couple of kind of rounding out slides. We could leverage the collective effort of the sector in the Te Uru Kahika submission or develop our own submission. I think the feedback clearly is our own submission has merit, and you've given us some points for that. So we'll take that as a task. When I say we, Warren, we'll take that as a task and craft up that submission.
Overall, though, I think most people here thought that the Te Uru Kahika submission was good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we can, we'll look at a way to make mention of that submission, but highlight the points that you've
Rather than
highlighted.
that we didn't support it, I
Yeah.
don't think that's where we're at. Yeah.
So submissions close next Friday. We've just talked about the separate process through the portal. The sector submission will be signed off by the chief executives. We will bring the submission back through the submissions working group. So we're aiming to get that through to the working group by Monday, maybe Tuesday at the latest, and then we'll refine internally and get that back out, and then opportunities to speak to the submission before the select committee. So they will generally at reasonably short notice, but I think we sent Councillor McCall up quite early on in your tenure, didn't we, to speak to the select committee?
Yeah, I've done that.
Yeah, so we can do that as well, and that's it.
Brilliant.
So so if you have feedback, you think of anything, just email it through to Warren and we'll coordinate and continue to work through with Joe. There's quite a few staff that are assisting, and happy to consider other things. That was a really high level summary of the bill, and there's a lot more detail in it that we haven't traversed in any lengths at all, but we have sent you the link to the bill. So if there is anything you want to look at or any questions, just come back to us. Otherwise, the process will be we'll draft a submission and we'll get there early next week to the submissions working group, lodge it next Friday.
Easy, yeah. Thank you very much for the opportunity here. Is there anyone who needs to say anything that we haven't covered? Nope. Okay.
Sorry.
Yep.
Just
Alan.
one thing I had seen there was about the appeals process, which is appeals can only be on matters of law. What's the significance? I mean, I don't quite, and I've looked at the section, I don't quite know what that means, matters of law. Is that really restrictive, and is that unusual in terms of environmental matters?
Yeah, so if I take you to the RPS, and you'll recall there's two different parts of the RPS and two different appeal processes. So the standard Schedule 1 RMA process is appeals to the Environment Court, and then appeals to the High Court on points of law beyond that. The freshwater planning regulations have appeals to the High Court only, as does the Auckland, or did the Auckland plan and the Christchurch City plan. So the new direction in RMA law seems to be more favoured to points of law only, but it is different, in the standard RMA process allows for Environment Court appeals.
Right.
This is picking up that sort of what seems to be a newer approach. So that means that a substantive appeal or an Environment Court appeal, it might be, a plan says you can only have black houses and actually you want black and grey. You can appeal to the Environment Court on that, as opposed to the High Court has to say, did the local authority or the panel make a decision in law in determining it was only black? So it is a different process. It is a more narrow process, but it is the way that we seem to be moving. You get really bogged down in Environment Court appeals.
Yeah. Right.
So hopefully streamlines things a bit.
Yeah, and I guess I can see, yes, it's more restrictive, but on the other hand, the purpose of this is to move things along faster, so it's natural they would have put that in.
Yeah.
And I might not think it's a good idea, but I can see why they did it. Yep.
Yeah, it seems on that one that with the Schedule 17 being so broad, it would be hard to find something that was a matter of law, pretty much. Councillor Weir.
Sure. Always got thoughts there. I just take your point earlier about making the submission on things that can practically be changed. And I think we've raised a few of those things where there was definitions about may and must and the defining analysis and regional and national benefits and all that stuff, and pushing for cost recovery and more transparency. I think those are all practical things that can be improved within still, achieving the government's goals with the bill and whatever. I do think it is important, though, just in terms of our relationship with iwi and our efforts on our Te Tiriti and stuff, that we highlight the bill needs to do far more to meet the Crown's obligations under security and stuff. And so even if that's not something they're likely to change, I just think in terms of our, as a council, relationship with Iwi and our efforts to honour strategy, that it's important we highlight that. But other than that,
Yeah, and certainly that's up to the, this table ultimately. I guess what I was saying is, and you've expressed it really well as it's not a one or the other, it can be an and or. But I would certainly also focus on how we can make what's proposed better. As well as if there's a mind to highlight any high level concerns.
I just said, and we'll come back to on that, but there's lots of musts in relation to treaty settlements and mana whakahaere and things like that. There are musts rather than mays in the legislation. I don't want to speak for how iwi consider this, impacts them. But there is slightly more rigour in some of the language and things like they must consult with the Minister of Māori Development and Treaty Settlements prior to things and must consider those in the report. So there is some rigour that has been built in, but we might just do a bit of an analysis across because it's scattered throughout and see if there's anything else in there.
Yeah, the difference is it largely speaks to treaty settlements and principles of the treaty settlements rather than the principles of Te Tiriti of Waitangi. Yeah, so that's where you'll be seeing the difference between other legislation.
Kevin.
Look, I'm probably disagreeing with that because when I read it, I thought there's actually everywhere we go there is a very good balance that, and especially in that clause where it says they must go back. So yeah, I don't know. How far do you take that? Because it's I think it's very well covered. It is for everyone, and I'm struggling to see why we should highlight any more from it, and apart from the treaty, apart from those who haven't had their treaty claims recognised at this stage or still in that process.
Yep, thanks, Kevin. Yeah, made a good point earlier on that one. Yep. Rightio. Anything else then? Still got a little bit of time, but we don't need to take it all up if we don't need to. Fantastic. Well, thank you everyone. And yeah, you've seen the timeline there, councillors, for feedback. We've got a fairly short time frame, but great to have had this opportunity to all feed in. And yeah, if you do have any further thoughts once you've digested this, just feed them through to Anita or Warren or who's best.
Yeah, if you send them through to me, and I'll make sure they get to Warren.
Sure.
Or you can send them to Warren directly. But yeah.
Yep, good one. So I will just close with the karakia. Kia tau te rangi Māori e, ki runga i ngā iwi o te ao. Thanks everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.